Chapter 10 of Narrative of Life of Frederick Douglass is by far the longest, and there's a lot to unpack here. And so I'm just going to hit on some of the major things that Frederick Douglass talks about and not get into the whole chapters in detail because that would just be like a 50-minute video. But there's just so much here, and you can see how he's continuously building this case against slavery and showing just the dehumanizing, hypocritical, and just tortuous effects that slavery has on slaves themselves as well as the slaveholders, and the evils that have caused that have occurred as a cause of slavery. And so he starts this chapter with a discussion on his new master, Mr. Covey, who had basically bought Frederick Douglass for a year from Thomas Auld. And Frederick Douglass is supposed to live with Covey for a year. And I want to go down and see this part in this paragraph here. Mr. Covey's forte consisted in his power to deceive. Mr. Covey was not a nice man. And prior to this, Frederick Douglass talks about a time when he was whipped by Mr. Covey. Mr. Covey made switches out of some branches, these really thin rods that when they whip, they would sting very intensely and oftentimes would break skin. And this was Frederick Douglass. He would constantly get whipped for dumb things like not being able to do his job because he didn't even know how to do his job. He wasn't properly trained, but he would get whipped. And this paragraph is important because it really shows you the character of Covey as a Christian. If you kind of scroll down a few sentences here, he seemed to think himself equal to deceiving the Almighty. He would make a short prayer in the morning and a long prayer at night, and strange as it may seem, few men would at times appear more devotional than he. He was a religious man, and he used religion in the name of slavery. And if we go down here, he says, poor man, such was his disposition and success at deceiving, I do verily believe that he sometimes deceived himself into the solemn belief that he was a sincere worshiper of the Most High God. And Frederick Douglass then starts talking about this incident where he took a slave woman and bought another slave man, and had them basically have sex with each other so that she could get pregnant and so he could have more slave babies. Because remember what happens when a slave woman gets pregnant, that child automatically becomes a slave. But you see, he's treating these slaves as basically animals. He's breeding them, and Frederick Douglass even calls it breeding. As a result, Mr. Covey adds to his wealth. Look at the last sentence of this first paragraph. The children were regarded as being quite an addition to his wealth because slaves were property, and he's just accumulating more property, thus making him richer. And it's just so sad, just so unfortunate. And in these first 6 months, Frederick Douglass talks about how it kind of broke him as a slave. Mr. Covey truly indeed broke him. And we see more about Frederick Douglass's own religion here. On Sundays, this particular Sunday, he was, he was thinking, should I just end it? And then he starts talking to God. Look at this paragraph here. My thoughts would compel utterance, and therefore, and there, with no audience but the Almighty, I would pour out my soul's complaint in my rude way, with an apostrophe to the moving multitude of ships. So he's just looking out and speaking to God, saying, you are loosed from your moorings and are free. I am fast in my chains and am a slave. You move merrily before the gentle gale, and I sadly before the bloody whip. You are freedom's swift-winged angels that fly around the world. I am confined in bands of iron. Oh, that I were free. Oh, that I were on one of your gallant decks. He's talking about ships here. And under the protecting wing. Alas, betwixt me and you, The turbid waters roll, go on, go on. Oh, that I could also go. Could I but swim, if I could fly. Oh, why was I born a man of whom to make a brute? The glad ship is gone. She hides in the dim distance. I am left in the hottest hell of unending slavery. Oh, God, save me. God, deliver me. Let me be free. Is there any God? Why am I a slave? I will run away. I will not stand it. Get caught or get clear. I'll try it. I had as well die with argue as the fever. And so he's talking about how even ships, these inanimate objects, live better lives than he does. And he's pouring out to the Lord, but in the end, he's resolving he needs to escape, and he's hoping for a better day that is coming. And I love this line here in this next paragraph here. He said, "You have seen," if you kind of go to the third sentence of this next paragraph here, "you have seen how a man was made a slave, you shall see how a slave was made a man." And he then talks about a very interesting event that really compelled him to desire his freedom even more. And this is this fight that he has with Mr. Covey. And in this fight, he's able to basically hold his own and fight back against Mr. Covey and show him that he's not going to take it anymore. And in fact, he resolves not to take it anymore. Oh wait, no, this is not this story. I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. This story is he gets beat up, he gets whacked by Mr. Covey, and he decides to go to his master. He walks 7 miles to his master to say, "Master, Mr. Covey is going to kill me. You need to take me back and send me somewhere else, or just take me back outright, because I'm not going to live under Mr. Covey." And the sad thing is this: the owner, the slaveholder, Mr. Thomas, he not necessarily doesn't believe Frederick Douglass, but he says, "Hey, it'll be fine. Yeah, I know Mr. Covey. He's not going to do anything to you." But lo and behold, he continues to have a terrible life, and then that's when they have that fight, and Frederick Douglass fights back. And down these few paragraphs here, yeah, and so he fights back, and he holds his own, and in fact does a good amount of harm to Mr. Covey. And look at this paragraph here. "This battle with Mr. Covey was the turning point in my career as a slave." And so he felt his own sense of manhood. He started having self-confidence and this determination to be free. It was like a glorious resurrection, bold defiance. And for the next 6 months, he wasn't really ever whipped again. And then Frederick Douglass talks about these two other, he kind of goes on a little tangent here, talking about how slaveholders were so deceitful. And I really want you to look at how they deceived the slaves by, helping them, or kind of not forcing them, but letting them go on holidays and kind of going to town and encouraging them to drink and to kind of overindulge. And when the slaves do this, they realize that they are sick and there's no hope, and the only thing they can do is go back to the slaveholders and back to their life of slavery. It's so deceitful. It's this the owners are trying to act benevolent, but there's this deceit under it, and they're actually really trying to keep them codependent to their slave status. And so Frederick Douglass mentions that, because it's important to see how the slaves were they stayed down in their unfortunate place in life. And then next, he talks about his next owner, Mr. Freeland. Mr. Freeland is a very interesting character because he is not like his previous owner, Mr. Covey, who was quite wicked, but Mr. Freeland was very different. He was gentle, he was honorable, he had respect. Excuse me. Like if you look here, he was passionate, he was just, and he didn't treat Frederick Douglass poorly. Yet, the main thing that I wanted to point out is he made no pretensions to or profession of religion. He was not a religious person, if you can see that right there on the screen. And that's so ironic because look at the very next sentence. The religion of the South is a mere covering for the most horrid crimes, a justifier of the most appalling barbarity, a sanctifier of the most hateful frauds, and a dark shelter under which the darkest, foulest, grossest, and most infernal deeds of slaveholders find the strongest protection. I hope that's a quote that you put as well, because that really sums up the whole theme of religious hypocrisy and how so many of these slaveholders and so many people in general justified their injustice, their slaveholding through religion. And the most religious people were often the most brutal slavers, and which is completely different. And when we read the appendix, you'll see just the dichotomy and the tension that that kind of serves in terms of the place of Christianity. And you get introduced to um, these reverends that live close to Mr. Freeland, and just how horrible they are. Like Reverend Rigby Hopkins. If you read up on him, you'll see just how religious he was, yet how terrible he was to his slaves. Right? And from there, yeah, that's just really important to kind of note the juxtaposition between the slavers who were not religious and the slavers who were religious. Okay? And so Frederick Douglass talks about his time with Mr. Freeland and how it really opened his eyes even more. And you can kind of see how he's progressing in his journey to wanting even more to be free. And so he's continuing this quest of freedom. And he really resolves while he's there that he must do something. He says that, and that he really is intending to run away and become free. And the chapter ends with an attempt to run away, unsuccessful attempt, unfortunately, and kind of showing the uh, just dangerous it is to really try to run away. And so continue reading that and see how he tried to get away, but how he was unsuccessful, and how it continues to perpetuate his desire to become free and really fuels that more. And he quotes Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death. And really, it speaks to this idea that he's living in America, a place where there's supposed to be freedom for all humanity, as we talked about when we started this unit. And yet, here is a group of people who are not free. And it's completely antithetical to what the founding fathers decided. And they themselves wanted freedom from England. And yet, here they are enslaving Black people, um, and it's just causing such hypocrisy within the nation. And so we'll continue reading chapter 11. So I hope that was helpful.